If you want to be a trendsetter and be prepared for 2010, you've got to stay tuned to this morning's Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Fox 43 studio. We're focused on a soon-to-be-released book, Megatrends 2010. And we're visiting with its New York Times best-selling author, Patricia Aburdene. Good morning, Patricia.
Good morning, Greg. I'm so happy to be here with you
Thanks so
today.
much for flying in from Boston last night. We were thrilled to grab you. And, of course, obviously we can't claim you're a Carolina person, but at the same time we'll adopt you for a couple of days. And so thrilled you're going to come back tomorrow morning to be with us.
Thank you so much.
Even more exciting. You know, I was thinking about it, trying to think early this morning. Of course, it was early this morning. You were trying to think, what was it like if you can think back to when you first figured out, you know, I've been putting pen to paper for a while, but I can not only put pen to paper, but also possibly get it out in front of a lot of other people to enjoy. Was there a, can you think back that far to think when you first figured out I can get stuff published?
Well, I think the driving, thrilling thing about getting stuff published is if you can come from a place where you say, I just did a lot of research and I just found out about a lot of things, and now I just want to share them with everyone. So if you can think that way, it just becomes natural and a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that must be. And of course, when you try to think back when that was, it's probably tough to actually put a finger on that as to actually when that was. It's probably quite a while.
Megatrends, the first book,
right,
was published in 1982.
Wow.
And so we're talking more than 20 years ago. And it was quickly followed up by several other Megatrends books until we got to today with Megatrends 2010.
Due in stores next month. It'll be out
next
month. You must be thrilled. What's that like every time on the eve of the actual date when they're out in stores as you get ready for that? Do you start getting nervous at all?
Not really nervous. I think mostly excited because, you know, you've worked on this baby for a long time.
Right.
In the case of Megatrends 2010, I've been working on it for well over 2 years, about 2 years and 3 or 4 months. But really, I've been working on it for my whole life. Because in this book, I talk about things that are very dear to my heart. And so it's unlike, it's very much like the other Megatrends books, but it's really me. It's really who I'm about.
That's great. Well, we'll look forward to getting more into that later this morning and surely tomorrow morning. Real quick about yourself. Are you originally from even close to the Carolinas?
Pretty far, Greg, I'm afraid.
A little bit of a trip, yeah.
I'm afraid I'm a Yankee. I was born in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. I went to college in Massachusetts. But I spent a lot of my adult life in Washington, D.C. Uh-huh. So that's pretty close. Am I going to get any credit for that?
You get a little credit for Washington. That's right. It kind of transcends a lot of states, so we'll give you credit for that. A lot of Tar Heels and Palmetto State folks spend time in our nation's capital. Now, what carried you to Washington? What was the motivating factor to end up in D.C.?
Actually, it was where my first husband got a job.
Uh-huh.
But I was very excited about it because we went to Washington, D.C. in late February. Now, having grown up in Massachusetts, late February is the dead of winter.
Yeah.
And I saw people riding around in bicycles and wearing sweaters, and I said, you know, this place is for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Lived there for a long time, but now I'm back to my original home state of Massachusetts.
And I guess had we, at some point in the year, we could say you'd flown in from Colorado, since you're spending a good bit of time. Is it in Telluride?
I do. I spend a good bit of time in Telluride, Colorado. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and it's a great place to go to write.
I think I saw that. You both wrote about that in one of the pieces of Megatrends 2010. There was a time when you said it, I'm a little sad almost always whenever I'm leaving, but perk up when I know when I arrive in Boston there are at least a couple of Whole Food stores that you're not seeing there in Telluride.
That's right. I wrote about that in the chapter on the values-driven consumer. And those consumers who are driven by the desire for health and healthy food find themselves at places like Whole Foods. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love shopping there. It's a great place.
Do you? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
And not in Telluride. There are not any Whole Foods stores there.
There aren't. Huh. There aren't. There are some wonderful farmers markets nearby, right. But that's one reason I really love to go back to Boston.
I'm sure. Until you write in the first place, what carried you out there? Was it the opportunity to find a place, kind of solitude, that would enable you to write potentially a little better?
Very much so. Was attracted there because of the natural beauty is extraordinary. And if you're somebody who's stressed out from writing books and that sort of thing, to be able to be in a natural setting, it feels absolutely terrific. But I stayed there because of the people, because it has absolutely fantastic people there, a profound sense of community that is increasingly important. If you travel around the globe, as I did at the time when John Nesbitt and I moved there, you really long for a sense of community, and we found it there.
Yes. You mentioned John Nesbitt, a name
Yes.
that when you all moved there, you said, of course, that was your co-author, or you all had worked on Megatrends back in the... So you all started on that, began planning that in the late 70s then?
Yes, absolutely. And we wrote Megatrends together. It was really his book, but I helped him with it, so I'm a collaborator on Megatrends, and then we co-authored 3 additional books. One was called Reinventing the Corporation.
Right, in 85.
In 85, followed by Megatrends 2000, which was a New York Times #1 bestseller.
Wow.
And that talked about the trends of the 1990s. And predicted them pretty well, I think. We talked about the shift from an industrial society to an information society. And at the time, that was actually in Megatrends, although we followed up in Megatrends 2000 with it. At the time, that was enormously controversial.
Oh, yeah.
People said, how can you make any money on information? And yet, as the 1990s progressed, information technology became a $1 trillion industry. And so people are indeed making money on information.
Every day, yes.
But today, the information society is already over, and an exciting new era is taking its place. And I talk about this era at the beginning of Megatrends 2010.
Now, are folks going to have to wait a month to find out what that trend is, or the new era, or can we let a little cat out of the bag this morning?
We can. Let's be brief, because this is kind of a demanding one. How do we create, the question is, how do we create wealth in our society? And more, in a technologically driven society, the way you create wealth is through innovation. You got to innovate. And I use the example of Medtronic, this fantastic company,
Yes.
medical device company.
Right.
For every product that they have on the market, they are working on 4 generations of upgrades. In a technology-driven society, a company has to anticipate the market. How do you do that? How do you stay ahead of the market? How do you anticipate the market? The only way is through the ingenuity of human consciousness. And consciousness is a big word in Megatrends
right.
2010, and you'll see me refer to it again and again. But what do I mean by that? I mean that engineer who is patiently contemplating a demanding technological problem is entering the realm of creativity and consciousness. And that engineer may uncover the next killer app, as they say in the technology business, the software application that's so universal it drives the sales of hardware, like email, like the internet, like word processing.
Sure.
The next one will be discovered by an engineer in the realm of consciousness, in the realm of creativity, and that is where all of the wealth, they'll create $100 million industry just like that.
Overnight.
And I want to give you another great example. We talk about how until very recently the Queen of England was the richest woman in the UK.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Generations of wealth, enormous wealth, until this little welfare mother came along and went into cafes and was scribbling in cafes and wrote the Harry Potter series.
Oh, yeah. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling is the wealthiest woman in Great Britain.
Oh, come on. Is she really?
She is wealthier.
She's overtaken the Queen.
She has overtaken the Queen of England.
That's
And where did
incredible.
her wealth come from? After generations of wealth, Her wealth came from her creativity, from her innovation, from her consciousness, just like those engineers at Apple who created the iPod and made Apple such an enormously successful corporation these days when, a few years ago people had written it off.
Sure.
So ingenuity, innovation, creativity, which come from the realm of consciousness, human consciousness, is where all the new wealth is coming from, the new economy of consciousness.
And you talk about it at times throughout the book, of course, we have the ability to be a part of that. It's not necessarily big corporate hands. It is virtually everyone, top to bottom, can be involved in that.
Absolutely. And J.K. Rowling is a terrific example.
Right.
So just as Apple is innovating like crazy, and Medtronic, so are individuals.
You think back, and you give it that example of Medtronic, and it's so perfect. And I think you shared last night after you got in from Boston that Medtronic in 1957, had founded the first pacemaker.
That's correct.
And of course, you think how much time has been involved. You think back to 1938, is it, or a year similar to that, FDR signing the push to find a cure to polio. And then whatever year, maybe 54, the Jonas Salk comes up with that. Think how many years Salk had been plugging away at that. And you think how many years somebody there at Medtronic was working hard to come up with a pacemaker, that idea. And you wonder how long J.K. Rowling was putting into that. But to know that she could be a part of that and to really be it is incredible.
It's very exciting. It's very exciting. And as you suggest, it's very democratic because it tells us, how do we cultivate consciousness? Well, it's no surprise that more and more corporations, from Yahoo to Google to AstraZeneca, are sponsoring company-paid meditation courses.
Right.
It definitely reduces stress, but it also enhances corporate creativity, the source of all future wealth that we create. Just like Medtronic inventing pacemakers. I think that it's happening a lot faster. You talked about decades. Today, it could happen any moment.
You talk about at one point, it was within a chapter, of course I can't peg the chapter, please forgive me, Heart Math. Heart Math that came up, and of course we're talking about Medtronic, we're talking about hearts. It wasn't even in the same chapter either, but it came out, it really was exciting learning about Heart Math, that's something I've never heard of.
Heart Math is a fascinating organization, a fascinating technology, whereby individuals can be, I believe they just use a fingertip to connect your pulse to a personal computer that literally graphs out for you the rhythms and cadences of the heart. And Heart Math shows people how to monitor those rhythms and cadences to really see that when they're stressed out, when they have negative emotions like fear, the graph just kind of goes all crazy, and they're really not very productive. We have this illusion that when we're all stressed out and upset about things, that we're really getting something done.
Right.
And it's not true. When we're calm, when we're relaxed, as Heart Math technology shows people how to do, they're a lot more productive, and Heart Math has been in companies like Boeing, Motorola, Cisco, Hewlett-Packard, Liz Claiborne. They've brought this technology into many Fortune 500 companies.
I saw that. I was fascinated to see the impact that it's already having, and to really know that the recognition of the heart as opposed to the entire focus on the mind.
That's right.
That the heart should have a real important place in the workplace.
And in productivity. It's exciting. But I have another great example of that for you. There's a gentleman named Fred Luskin who has been running something called the Forgiveness Project. And he's been all over the world in hot spots like Northern Ireland, teaching people the wonderful power of forgiveness. So somehow American Express invited him into their company, and he worked on a year-long project with some of their stockbrokers who sell stocks.
Right.
And there was a bit of coaching involved in it and some reading, and this was a year-long program. And they measured stress levels, they measured positive feelings. At the end of the program, with the first group that he worked on, stress levels had declined 25%.
No.
And positive feelings had increased 20%. But, bottom line, the forgiveness-trained stockbrokers outproduced their peers by 60%. It didn't end there, though, because he brought 3 more groups through, and the results just got better. In the final analysis, the forgiveness-trained stockbrokers outperformed their peers by between 60 and 400%.
Oh, come on, Patricia.
And the moral of the story is, when you're at peace with yourself, you are more connected to other people, to creativity, to the kinds of things that make you a more productive person in the workforce.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it?
And very exciting, yeah.
And that's in Chapter 6 of Megatrends 2010.
That's right.
The Wave of Conscious Solutions.
We need to break down, and of course the 7 chapters within the book are really highlighting 7 megatrends. And of course, virtually anyone who's watching is thinking, what's a megatrend? How did Patricia have something to do with coining that phrase? And B, what is it?
Well, a megatrend is a very large direction in which society is moving. A megatrend is so large that it tends to be a direction that's going to influence us for at least a decade. So no mini trends allowed, at least not in my books.
Right.
A megatrend is a large, sometimes it's a very subtle direction though, but it influences us for about a decade or so. It could have a different flavor. It could be an economic trend. It could be a political trend. It could be a social trend. And in Megatrends 2010, I also added spiritual trends. So we're kind of looking at a very multi-dimensional holograph of what's going on in society, with trends coming at you from all different kinds of levels.
And did you have the same feel in earlier Megatrends back in '82, or even in Megatrends 2000 and 1990? You seeing the same, or has that your view of megatrends changed at all?
One thing that has remained quite constant is that when you look at megatrends in the United States of America, the big tip-off is when a similar trend starts emerging in many different geographical locations. That's always a big hint that you're onto a very big megatrend. And one of the megatrends that I talk about is the interest in spirituality in business. And I have to report to you that that interest is just blossoming up, bottom up. It's happening in your red states, it's happening in your blue states, in Boston, in Charlotte, North Carolina, in Minneapolis, in Fort Worth, Texas. Many of the local newspapers are carrying stories about people's interest in spirituality in business. The desire to find meaning, the desire to sort of not leave your spirituality or your faith at the office door. Not that you want to broadcast it or proselytize it or convince somebody else about it, but just that you can kind of connect to it on the job. And people really have this yearning. 50%, according to Gallup, 50% of people talked about their faith in the workplace within the last 24 hours of when they did that survey.
Wow.
And another fascinating survey, this particular one wasn't by Gallup, concluded that 81% of people use some kind of a personal spiritual practice at work. It might be silent prayer, it might be meditation, or just silence. So people feel the need to draw on all of themselves in the workplace, not just their mind or their physical body, but the things that they hold dear.
That's fascinating. There were 2 things you used the word meaning.
Meaning.
And do I want to make meaning? And what meaning for me may be meaning entirely different for someone else in the workplace. I know you open, even in the preface there, talking about Gordon Gekko, and it was exciting hearing greed, and then of course in the conclusion, seeing the word greed and seeing the Dean Thoreau, possibly from the Sloan School of Management, talking about greed, and thinking about how that worked both in the beginning of the book and there at the end, and how it's utilized. But if someone's meaning is greed, if they want to make meaning, obviously they don't work hand in hand together. I mean, the meaning must be what?
Well, I think that you've hit upon something that's very, very, very dear to my heart, and that is, to me, it's crazy to me that we think greed is somehow the fountain of wealth or the bedrock of capitalism. I think that the evidence shows that greed, well, we look at the accounting scandals of a few years ago, didn't result in a lot of great prosperity for people. $7 trillion vanished in shareholder wealth, vanished into thin air because of the greed, the excessive greed that was going on at that point. So I think we need to take a new look and see at what capitalism is really about. And I believe that conscious capitalism is a new version, a new iteration, if you will, of what capitalism is, because it's not set in stone. It's not an economic ideology that Adam Smith or Milton Friedman have carved into stone. It's a living philosophy that people like you and I make choices about, make financial choices about every day of our lives. So it's a living, dynamic philosophy. And if we see that integrity, that trust is what is essential to doing business with one another, to be able to trust your colleague, to be able to do a handshake deal, then it becomes increasingly clear that the key to prosperity in modern day capitalism is something very positive, and it's not greed at all. But you know, it's so hard, and this is a kind of a megatrend kind of thing. We're often dealing with our picture of the world that's decades old. We have these old ideas, and we need to catch up with what's really going on now. And when you think of it, greed doesn't do a whole lot to produce prosperity, but trust and integrity do.
Right. You even used an old phrase, what Grandma speaking, enough is enough. You got enough. Don't worry about it. You define, or Dean Thoreau defines greed. It was a great example of wanting more, or I can't remember. No matter how much you've got.
And I just called him on that, and I said, that makes no sense. Didn't your grandma ever tell you enough is enough?
That's right.
And you know, it's really true. And I talk about modern psychology. I just mentioned it in brief because, you know, my readers like me to be, you know, very concise and keep it moving.
Sure.
But, you know, I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have basic needs. It's true. It's true we need our basic needs met. We need shelter. We need food. We need clothing. I'm not denying that in any way, shape, or form. But once we achieve those basic needs, we move on. We want self-esteem. We want belonging in the community. We want the kinds of things that are about trust and integrity. So that's why I think I have to challenge Professor Thoreau there a little bit on that.
You speak about him as an economic guru, but at the same time, he's worthy of being challenged. That's right.
Well, I think that he articulates a philosophy that is decades old, but that many people still espouse. And so that I hope that in Megatrends 2010, I present an alternative vision of capitalism that is already, I mean, I didn't dream it up.
Sure, no.
I'm the trend tracker. I'm watching millions of people who are living a new kind of capitalism all across America and the world, for that matter. And
you use so well, and I'm so glad you pulled that out, a quote from the CEO or maybe one of the founders of Medtronic. Not to go back to Medtronic, but that idea that we focus on patients. And when we do that, and of course you reflect on their annual growth of 20% a year, I mean, every year. And have seen that for a heck of a long time, but to know their focus is on patients, is on a higher calling, and definitely providing meaning.
They're a fabulous example, and their CEO, Bill George, was the person, he has now retired, but he was chairman and CEO, and he said that again and again. Our responsibility, he even said it, he kind of kicked a little sand in the face of Wall Street. He said, our responsibility is not primarily to shareholders. Our responsibility is to patients. And if we produce products that they want and that they need and that they use, our profitability will take care of itself. And for well over a decade, Medtronic realized 20% per year in in profit growth, and that's pretty darn good stat.
Patricia, a viewer can't be with us tomorrow, and of course with the book coming out in stores next month, what would be and it's tough to encapsulate in less than a minute, what would be a reason why one of our viewers would be interested or should pick up Megatrends 2010 next month?
What Megatrends 2010 will do for a lot of people is validate what they in their heart and in their minds already know is the kind of capitalism that they want to espouse. So many of us talk about how horrible it is that corporations are obsessed by greed. But how many of us say, what am I doing as an investor? What am I doing as a consumer to change how things are? And so in Megatrends 2010, I talk about the very, very important role that you and I have as investors, as consumers, as employees, as activists, or as CEOs in accelerating the pace of change, to have the kind of economic philosophy that's going to open the doors to the future for us, that's going to open the doors to prosperity and abundance for us. And I believe, and so do millions of other people, it's not the greed brand of capitalism, it's a new, vital, equally prosperous, conscious capitalism.
Great words. We'll have to hope folks can be back tomorrow. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Patricia Aburdene coming up next. During Megatrends 2010, Patricia Aburdene stressed as one among many things, we have the power to transform capitalism. Who is the we she's referring to? You got to come back tomorrow for part 2 of Megatrends 2010.